So I'm absolutely delighted that my guest is Zoe Harcombe, PhD in public health nutrition. Zoe is a prolific author and writer and speaker. Welcome, Zoe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, Janey, thanks so much for having me. We're just
It's,
catching up, weren't we? Saying how long it's been.
yeah, I
It's
know it's so
crazy.
long since I've caught you. I think you did Steve Right in the Afternoon a couple of times, and obviously I've recommended your books over the years to so many people. You do such amazing work.
Oh,
So I don't know where to start really, but why don't we just start with tell us a bit about your most recent book, The Diet Fix, because even just your sort of generic take on nutrition and diet and where everything fits together, I think would be quite a nice place to start.
oh, okay. Thank you for that. The diet fix I tried to make really general because I'd done some quite specific books before on food cravings and conditions that cause food cravings and overeating and all that kind of thing. And in the diet fix, what I really wanted to do was to talk about what I think we should be eating, because you get asked that so many times. As you say, I've been on Steve Wright, and one of the classic questions that radio presenters ask you is, oh, it's all really confusing. It's coffee one week and then it's not, and then it's eggs and then it's not. And what should we be eating? And to me, it's just so simple. Number one, eat real food. And
Yeah.
people say, oh, what's real food? Well, if it comes from a tree and a farm as opposed to a factory, that's real food. So I have this little saying, oranges grow on trees, cartons of orange juice don't. Fish swim in the sea, fish fingers don't. You know, it's really not that difficult, guys. Don't overcomplicate it. Then the second principle is choose that real food for the nutrients it provides. And that then directs you towards certain foods, and it incredibly directs you to the almost exact opposite of the foods that we're being told to eat by our dear governments. Because if you then look at things like micronutrients, forget the macronutrients for a while, but just look at the micronutrients that we need, 13 vitamins and approximately 16 minerals. You will then be driven to eat red meat rather than white meat, oily fish rather than white fish, eggs, full fat dairy rather than low fat dairy, green things, nuts and seeds. And that would form the basis of your diet, not the starchy foods that our governments tell us to eat.
Mm.
And then my third principle is eat no more than 3 times a day. If you don't like breakfast, fine, eat twice a day. If you don't like lunch, fine, eat twice a day. But we cannot be grazing the whole time as we are at the moment, and then imagining somehow we're not going to get epidemics of obesity and diabetes. It just can't happen.
I mean, I know one of the things that you did a huge amount of work on was this whole demonizing of fat that went on for such a long time. I mean, in recent times, probably largely because of your work and others, we're starting to get the idea now that actually fat isn't the baddie, sugar is. And just
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about where we are with that now, and a bit about your take on it all.
Yeah, so that was actually the subject of my PhD, because my original fascination was obesity. You have to excuse me touching my face, but I think the lockdown hairdresser situation,
Oh,
I
tell me
have
about it.
this normally chic little short haircut, which is not in my eyes, but I need my hairdresser back. I love you, come back. All is forgiven. Yeah, so my PhD, my fascination was obesity, and I wanted to understand why we had this obesity epidemic. So to understand the obesity epidemic, you go back to look at when we became obese. It's not rocket science. And you look and you see that in 1972, these are stats that I just remember, 1972, in the UK, 2.7% of men and 2.7% of women were obese. And then wind forward to the back end of the last century, and it was 22.6% of men, 25.8%
Wow.
of women.
Oh
So it's
my
like
goodness, that's massive.
tenfold. It's tenfold in one quarter, in 2.5 decades. It's unimaginable. And then so you say, well, so what happened then? And I'm really open to anybody coming to me with their point of view. Well, we started eating more, we started doing less. The evidence just doesn't support that. It actually supports the opposite. The calorie intake was going down. Our exercise has been going up. We never used to run marathons. Now everyone's running marathons. I can't get outside for people falling over running marathons. The evidence just doesn't hold up. But what did happen is that we changed what we told people to eat. So in 1977 in the US and in 1983 in the UK, in came the low-fat dietary guidelines. And when I explain it to people, imagine a pie diagram. And there's only three things we eat, and they're protein, fat, and carbohydrate. And here's a nutritional fact, and it's just a nutritional fact. Protein tends to be about 15% of any natural diet. Doesn't much matter if you're a vegetarian, vegan, eating the government guidelines. It tends to be just about 15%. It can sure go up to 20% more for people who are doing ketogenic diets or carnivore diets, but it tends to be around 15% in almost everyone else. And then when you've got that pie, so you've put a section in that's 15% for protein, the minute you tell people that fat should be no more than 30%, you can see what you've done to the carbohydrate segment. So that then has to be 55%. So when we told people to eat less fat, we at the same time were telling them to eat more carbohydrate. And in fact, to be quite honest, the government, if you look at their recommended menus, and I've analysed them in great detail for macronutrients and micronutrients, they are sometimes as low as 17% fat. And accordingly, they're about 67 to 70% carbohydrate. I mean, it's absolutely imbalanced. It's incredible how much carbohydrate we want people eating. And then we got fat, and we got sick, and we got diabetes, and we didn't help heart disease. That's as bad as ever, particularly if you take out what's been improved with smoking. So that's a theory that I've got. And when I looked at my PhD to say, okay, what was the evidence for introducing those dietary fat guidelines? The short answer is there was absolutely none at the time, and there's no more today.
But I guess if we follow the money chain, I guess that there was much more money to be made, if we're being cynical. There's a lot more money to be made in promoting carbohydrates, ready meals, things with sugar in, lots of processed foods, far more than there is if we're trying to, recommend that people eat a piece of, decent quality meat or fish and fresh fruit and veg.
Yeah. And that's totally it. I mean, some research came out, I think within the last couple of years, showing that at the time the dietary guidelines were being put together, research was being suppressed, saying actually sugar is the issue, because people had this low fat agenda. And actually what they wanted to be able to do was take the fat out of products, put sugar in, and then this whole low fat, fake food, fat-free, calorie-free, all this other thing, just completely exploded. And it hasn't made us any slimmer or any healthier. In fact, quite the opposite.
Yeah. And I know that in your books, in the Harcombe diet, it's difficult to explain everything that you do, but it's real food that people are eating. The great thing about doing your diets is that you don't get hungry because you are recommending real food. But at the beginning of the book, of what you suggest, you are recommending that people cut out the stuff that they're intolerant to. So just talk us through that a little bit, because I know that your theory is that most of us have a bit of an intolerance to a lot of the crap we've been eating.
Yeah. This came from personal experience. So in my late teens, throughout Cambridge University, early 20s, like so many of my peers at that time, and probably like so many people today, I had a really bad relationship with food, and I felt completely addicted to certain foods. And I remember, because I've got maths is my subject, so I've got a pretty logical brain. I'm much more thinking than I am feeling. And it just made no sense to me. Why is it that there's certain foods that I can't stop eating? I've got no interest in salmon and green beans whatsoever. But I have this massive interest in biscuits and ice cream gateaux and Quality Street and boxes of chocolates and fish and chips and just really strange things. And I started looking into it into more detail. And when you look at a model of addiction, and I know that it's disputed that things like sugar, food could even become addictive, but when you look at a simple model of addiction, I just defy anyone to say that some foods are not addictive. So with addiction, you want a particular thing. So you don't want the salmon and the green beans, you want the bar of chocolate. So let's say my addiction at that time, and it probably was, main one was chocolate. So you want chocolate. Then the second stage of addiction is that you want more and more of that thing. So one bar of chocolate suddenly doesn't do it. You want another one mid-morning. And then you start wanting chocolate to the exclusion of everything else. So why have lunch? I'll just have a bar of chocolate, same kind of calories. You have this terrible mindset. And then the third stage of addiction is that you start to feel bad when you don't have that substance. And that's what people notice when they go on a diet and they wonder why they can't stick at it. They're so used to having chocolate that actually you get quite horrific withdrawal symptoms, which are connected to the food intolerance that has developed from the person having this substance too much too often, which is almost a definition of food intolerance.
Mm.
But it's only when we get to stage 4 that we seek help. And stage 4 is that you suffer consequences of the stages 1, 2, and 3. The fact that you've been eating so much chocolate, you've been feeling bad when you don't have it. And of course, our stage 4 issues are that we become overweight. That was the one that worried me. I'd be putting on weight if I ate too much chocolate. And for more and more people today, it's that we become type 2 diabetic. We have increased heart disease risk factors, perhaps even cancer. There is research into cancer and processed food. And that would be what would finally get somebody to seek help. I've often joked, if fake food, carbohydrates had no impact whatsoever on weight or health, I would eat crap all day long. I mean, why would you not? Seriously, why would you ever have liver and onions instead of a Viennetta gatto or an ice cream tub? I mean, why would you? But unfortunately, it does have a massive impact on weight and health, and therefore I can't do that all day long. I've actually got to eat the salmon and the green beans and stuff that I might find less interesting, but stuff that I actually need to eat because it's going to give me the nutrients that I need to be healthy.
What would your top tips be then for someone who knows that they are, and particularly at the moment, you know, we're recording this during lockdown and, you know, people are sort of stuck indoors. Their one little treat is eating. And, I've been talking a lot about the fact that sales of alcohol have risen. And I'm guessing if there was a study done, they'd find sales of chocolate and crap food have risen as well. So, for the people who know that they're on a dangerous path here, what are the simple things we can do to just make a start on curbing these addictions, if you like, and when you get the cravings for sugar, I mean, the salmon and the green beans are not going to hit the spot, are they? So what can we do?
No, very good. And in fact, in the Sunday Times yesterday, there is research already that apparently 43% of people are worried that they've already put on weight during lockdown. So the evidence is there. I've also seen some of the alcohol evidence that you're talking about. The wine o'clock is starting earlier. People are not commuting. They're not coming back from work at 8 o'clock. They're at home at 5 o'clock and you're stressed, you're anxious. It's a troubling time. So why would you not want a glass of wine? A couple of general tips. I mean, one is I really try to encourage people not to see junk as a treat. And right from childhood, when I've done interviews on radios about childhood obesity, and some of the radio presenters get a little bit provocative and say, oh, you know, you're a killjoy and all the rest of it. It's like, if I have one wish for parents, please, can you not bring your child up making them think that junk equals a treat? Make them realize that junk is junk. It's bad for you. It's rubbish. It's junky. Get the right word associations connected with junk, manufactured processed food. And then children can be, I remember working with a TV producer once who was saying to her 7-year-old boy, you can have one piece of rubbish a day, and that can either be a bag of crisps or a small confectionery bar or a very small amount of fizzy drink or whatever, but it's your choice. And of course, I mean, what a brilliant idea, because how long is it before the child is saying to the parent, why do I even have one bad thing a day? And then they're making up, you put it in a completely different framed reference technique.
Rather than if you behave well, you can have a treat, which is a load of crap.
That's so got to stop.
So ingrained, isn't it?
It is. And because it's ingrained. Okay, so maybe if you didn't realize that, let's say you're 50 and you're trying to overcome a weight problem that you've had for a long period of time, maybe even 35, 30 years. Realize that now, hold the mirror up to it, realize you've had 35 years of conditioning. It is ingrained. It was wrong. People didn't give you the best start in giving you that message, but you can change that right now. You can write down all the words junk, rubbish, crap, all of them write down, so that you now make a new association, and just very, very quickly in your head start saying, no, having a confectionery bar is not being nice to myself. It's not a treat. it will make me sick, it will make me fat, it will make me high for 30 minutes, and then I'll have a crash of energy and it's not very nice. Own all of those feelings that you have when you have that thing, and just say, do you know what, I'm not going to do it. And that brings us into the second thing that you must do. Unfortunately, if you are addicted to something, you have to avoid it. Alcoholics Anonymous is right, and they are right for very good reason. And people who help people to give up smoking, they are right for very good reason. You have to stop smoking. Now, I accept that food is one of the most difficult addictions, because we can't
stop
eating.
eating.
We have to eat.
Exactly.
But we can stop eating certain things. And the first thing that I would say to people is, if you really want to curb your addiction, the things that you are addicted to are basically flour and sugar. And if you want to give up just one thing, give up sucrose, table sugar. You'll soon realize what it's in. Give up sweetness at the same time, because that can of Diet Coke is no better for you than the can of full sugar Coke. Give up sugar and sweeteners. If you want to go whole hog, give up sugar, sweeteners and flour. What is left to eat? Well, actually, all the real food. And it is the most nutritious real foods: the meat, fish, eggs, dairy products, green things, nuts and seeds. The carby based real foods are not quite so nutritious when you compare them for nutrient density, but that doesn't mean that some of them are not great foods, and they've got great nutrients. Beans, pulses, legumes, lentils, they have some fantastic nutrient density. It just can't compare to, say, liver. But dare I say, because I hate liver, but just in terms of nutritional facts. But it doesn't mean that those aren't great foods. It doesn't mean that brown rice isn't a valuable food, or quinoa. Just try to avoid wheat, and definitely avoid sugar for a period of time, and your health, it changes so quickly.
But I think it's important as well to, I mean, I know, because I've read your books, you know, in detail, and done your diet a while ago. And I know that what you stress in addition, you know, to what you've just said, is that you do stress that we don't starve ourselves, though. You know, we don't sort of fast all the time and try and have tiny amounts of food. We can have good portions of food, but real food.
Yeah, it's almost crowding out.
Yeah, exactly. It's
So,
what you're
what?
putting in, isn't it? Really, what
Yes,
you, rather than what you're
yeah,
not having.
yes, and that's very, very deliberate. So you try to get people to think about what they can have rather than what they can't have. So if you're used to having a sugary cereal for breakfast, because you think it's low calorie, low fat, all that stuff, a glass of orange juice, and you wouldn't think of having full fat Greek yogurt because you've got this, I eat low fat, high carb. If you're in that mindset, which is actually the government recommendations mindset, then it is a bit of a twist of a mindset. But to have something like scrambled eggs for breakfast, or full fat Greek yogurt with some berries, or full fat cappuccino, really decent amount of some really nicely sourced milk, if you are able to get some really good milk, you feel so full. It's just incredible. And you think, oh my goodness, when I had my cereal and orange juice at 7 o'clock in the morning, let's say, by 9:30, 10 o'clock, I was feeling hungry. And then I had my full fat yogurt, or some eggs, and berries, and at decent portion sizes as well. And you know what? I wasn't even thinking about lunch until 12, 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then you have a really good lunch.
I mean, it's really interesting, because actually, you know, what you're talking about is real common sense stuff. It's what, you know, your mum or your grandma would have eaten back in the day, isn't it? You know, because, you know, I remember when I was a kid, you know, we, yes, there was a bit of sugar around, you know, we had some cake, but we probably would only have had cake once a week, max.
Yeah.
You know, no way would have I had chocolate bars and crisps every day. And,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not saying I had a perfect nutritional childhood, because I certainly didn't, but there just wasn't that stuff available. No one had that much. So you are right about how over time we've gotten away from this sort of common sense approach, which is what you're saying, really.
Yeah, I was the same. I mean, Sunday morning used to be one of my favourite sessions of the week. It was my morning bake with my mum. And obviously she was doing most of it, and I was just having fun with her and chatting to her. And if I was getting in the way, she'd just give me some flour and water to play with. It turns into Play-Doh, and you can be kept out of the way. But at the end of it, we would have a cake, and we would have a few biscuits, and we might have a flapjack, and we'd have a Sunday roast, and we'd have some useful things. We might have some potatoes that would then be mashed potato in a couple of days' time. We didn't have pasta and these ready meals and microwave meals and all the stuff that people are relying on today. And when the cake was gone, it was gone. And when the biscuits was gone, they were gone. And they didn't come back until next week. And it's this constant availability of junk. When you go to the cinema, you go to the supermarket, you go to the petrol station, you go into clothes shops. Have you seen, we can't do that now. I mean, I wish we could, but the times I've gone into clothes shops and there've been sweets at the till, or you go into the newsagents. W.H. Smith used to be the place where you'd go and buy
books and magazines,
and stationery and a birthday card. And now you get to the till and there's this thing that's, hold my arms up, there's about the size of me. And, do you want a kilogram of milk chocolate for 50p? No, I don't. And I don't want to be rude to the poor assistant because it's not their fault, but I do gently say to them, could you possibly feed back to your superiors that this just isn't acceptable? In the midst of an obesity epidemic, to be offering me a kilo of chocolate when I've just bought a birthday card really isn't helpful. And I can say no, but I used to work for Mars Confectionery. There you go, there's a bit of a confession. And I therefore know that 7 out of 10 purchases of confectionery are made entirely on impulse. 7 out of 10 times you walked into the petrol station intending to pay only for your petrol and to buy nothing else, and you came out with something, because those racks are just in front of us quite deliberately. By the time we've got to the front of the queue, suddenly we've got something in our hand that we had no intention of buying, and that's got to stop.
It's got to stop. What about for the sugar heads then? For when you've just got that craving, what can we have that's more of a what's allowed? Can we have dates? Can we what would you recommend? Dark chocolate? Can we get away with a bit of that?
Dark chocolate, definitely more than dates. I don't know if you know, but dates actually have more sugar than toffee.
Oh God, don't tell me that.
People will say, certainly the dried medjool dates, people will say, well, it's natural sugar. It's sugar. It's the same stuff. The body doesn't know the difference. I remember hearing a Radio 4 program a few years ago when the interviewer asked a biochemist about the sugar, and he said, well, but surely it's different. And you could hear the disdain in the biochemist's voice when he was sort of saying to the interviewer, making it like, are you stupid or something? How does the body know the difference? Sucrose is sucrose. The body doesn't know where it came from. Sure, dates come with some other nutrients that the white sugar bowl doesn't, and it comes with some fiber, which the white sugar bowl doesn't. That's a whole different story. But the sugar bit is the sugar bit, and there's way too much sugar. Dates, by the way, were one of my binge foods. Dates were one of my foods that I thought, this is just so healthy. And I remember looking at the calories and the sugar on the back, because I was a calorie counter at the time. I mean, that's long gone. Who cares about calories? Care about quality of food. And I remember looking at the back packet saying, oh, there's, I don't know, 700 calories in this small packet of medjool dates. And I just thought, that's ridiculous. That can't possibly be right. There's no way. It just was wrong. I could eat a packet of those quite easily and then be going out shopping later in the day for another packet. So no, dark chocolate is my go-to.
Okay, so we're talking sort of like 75%, 80% cacao?
Yeah, the higher you can get, the better. So I like 85%. Andy likes 90, 92. I find that too strong. It's then become not fun anymore. But I really do like 85%.
And can we have a handful of nuts with that?
Yeah, nuts are a really interesting food. So in the Harcombe diet books, nuts and seeds are kind of one of the few areas where I would break my own general diet advice. So the eat real food, choose that real food for the nutrients it provides. There are some really good nutrients in nuts and seeds. But the really interesting thing about nuts and seeds is that, remember that fat, carbon, protein. Nature basically puts food into two groups. So nature says there's carb proteins, which are things that vegans would eat. They're things like fruit, vegetables, grains, beans and pulses. And then there are fat proteins, which are things that vegans don't eat. And that's your meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. But almost never does nature put carb, fat, and protein all together in the same food. So you don't get that carb fat mix in nature. The only times when nature has done it is with nuts and seeds. And as you'll know, nuts and seeds have a decent carb value and they have a decent fat value. They also have a decent protein value. So they are the complete foods. But that fat carb combo is the one that sets us off. And it's the one that the fake food manufacturers have realized. Give us bread alone, we've got a limit. Give us butter alone, we've got a limit. Put the two together, we've got no limit.
Yeah.
It's true. They tell me cheese and biscuits.
Oh, I know. You can never just have one, can you? It's the whole packet.
Exactly. But if you only had cheese on its own, you would stop. If you only had the oat cakes on their own, you would actually stop because they get quite dry. Cheese, brie and oat cakes together. Oh, my mouth is drooling now. I mean, I'd be there for the next hour. So the fake food manufacturers, think of every fake food that you can't resist. Chocolate, biscuits, cakes, ice cream, Pringles, all those kind of things. They have the bliss point of fat and carbohydrate that we just cannot stop eating. So for me, with nuts, if I start on a bag of nuts, I can't stop. They have that bliss point for me, which they're almost the fake food of the real food world, but they are nutritious. But if you can't eat them in moderation, don't start.
Yeah. In terms of boosting our immunity, you know, right now, a lot of people are thinking, okay, even if never before, people are starting to recognize the importance of looking after themselves and staying well. So where does, you know, the diet that you talk about, the real food, where does that fit into boosting our immunity and keeping us well?
Yeah, I think diet it's one of the things that we can do. So if you look at, I think that the study that really nailed lifestyle factors was actually the Caffili study, which was done on men back in the 1960s, 70s. And there was a fantastic paper that was published in PLOS ONE in 2013. And they looked back on it after 30 years and they said, do you know what, this is just incredible. There are 5 healthy behaviors. And the people that do 4 or 5 of these healthy behaviors, they have about half of the non-communicable diseases that the other people have. And they won't come as any surprise. So don't smoke, do take exercise, be a healthy weight, have a healthy diet, although that's what we're debating now. What exactly is a healthy diet?
Yeah.
And drink alcohol in moderation. It's actually better being a moderate drinker than it is being a non-drinker or being a very heavy drinker. It very much follows a bell curve. And those lifestyle factors haven't changed. So diet is just one of those. And all of those basically go to giving us the best resistance possible that we've got against what we call these non-communicable illnesses. So not things that you catch. Now, what we're talking about at the moment is something that we catch, but the principle of immunity is similar. If you've got a strong immune system, such that you don't succumb to diabetes or less often to heart disease and cancer, you'll have a strong immune system. It doesn't mean you're not going to get the virus. There's no protection that any nutrient that certainly that I'm aware of can give you any prevention, but you will be in a better place to fight off viruses, just as cold is a virus, the common cold, and flu is a virus. And we know people who seem to sail through it, and we know people who really seem to succumb to it, and it goes on for days. And they're also the people that don't look after themselves, and they don't sleep well, and they work too hard. It's just this whole lifestyle thing. So where does diet fit in? I think at all times, not just right now, but maybe especially right now, a good diet is just really, really important. And we need a good diet because there are those 13 vitamins and, as we say, approximately 16 minerals that we think are really, really key. And they're key for everything. And we know that if you don't, for example, get the right vitamin A in the right quantities, you can suffer eye disease. We know, and we've known since the first vitamin was even named. In fact, the term vitamin comes from about 1913. the first vitamins were starting to be seriously identified in the 1920s and 1930s. And by the middle of the last century, we could actually manufacture and synthesize any of the main vitamins.
Well,
and
on that
minerals.
note, sorry to interrupt you, but you talk about the list of vitamins and minerals, but surely one of the problems that we have now is that over time, because of mass production and the soil isn't what it was, does the food that we eat provide us with enough of those essential vitamins and minerals anymore?
Yeah, really, really good point. And there's 2 points here. One, the original dietary guidelines, or sorry, the RDAs, the recommended daily intakes of these micronutrients, was set back in about 1941. And they were set at that time because we were starting to worry about the impact of war and whether or not we would get sufficient nutrients. And we just had the Great Depression and all that kind of thing. So first of all, those RDAs may not be high enough. And I certainly know that there are many vitamin experts who say that a lot of our nutrient references are nowhere near high enough. And then exactly as you say, we've got the double whammy that our food today is far more processed. Even where we've got good quality food, the soil that it's being grown in is not of the quality that it used to be. We don't have this 3-field system where we're replenishing the soil the whole time. So we have all of these issues. So yes, it would be great if we got sufficient nutrition from our diets. If you're not eating a red meat, oily fish, full fat dairy, green things kind of diet anyway, you probably are going to be lacking something. And if you're lacking something, then yes, you should think about supplementing. And maybe you should think about supplementing as an insurance policy, because the only thing it's going to hurt is your purse if you get it wrong. I would say take care, because nutrients work in tandem. And nature puts them in food in tandem for that reason. So you've got the bone nutrients, phosphorus, vitamin D, calcium. You'll find them in dairy products. You'll find them in oily fish. And you'll find them together because they work together. And if people start taking mega doses of single vitamins, it isn't always a good idea. So if somebody takes mega doses of iron, it can be a very bad idea, and you can get constipated, and iron needs to work with vitamin C. So you can make some bad decisions. But I'm sure you've done great interviews with vitamin experts on many nutrients and single nutrients. And I'd say to people, go and listen to that kind of thing. And particularly at the moment, the vitamins of interest are vitamin C and vitamin D.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Been very grateful for some sunshine in the UK lately.
Yes, for people who are able to get outside and who are fortunate enough to get gardens. And are we doing the right thing locking in people in tiny flats in London with 4 other people when they could be distancing safely in
the
a
fresh
massive
air?
park,
Yeah,
in the fresh air?
Yeah. Totally. Well, we could talk forever, couldn't we? Just briefly then on the obesity side of things. Again, I know you've done a lot of work around this. I mean, just remind us what the current state of play is in the UK. I'm guessing it's not a particularly happy picture, and how that relates to all of this. Is what kind of impact is that having on the severity of illness if people get sick?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Actually, I have been looking at the data because I just love numbers. And there's a couple of interesting things. I mean, on the data, as a general rule of thumb, we normally say that 2/3 of the UK population are either overweight or obese. And that's just on the BMI.
2/3?
Yeah,
Wow.
2/3 overweight or obese.
Wow.
And then probably slightly more overweight than obese. So you're probably looking at about 30% obesity across the UK at the moment. Now, the really interesting thing that we're noticing with COVID-19 is that we're starting to be able to see risk factors. And I did a blog recently on this, and the risk factors do differ. So the first risk factors that came out obviously came from China, and they were noticing that there's a risk factor in being male over female. They said that there's an age risk factor, and they thought that there was a smoking risk factor. Next, we got the data from Italy, and they said we're also observing an age risk factor, and we're observing the male risk factor. but we're also observing the comorbidity risk factor. So they said of the people who've died from the virus in Italy, they had an average of 2.7 comorbidities. So that might be diabetes and heart disease, and the 0.7 obviously is the averaging of many, many people, might be cancer as well in a number of different cases. So seriously unwell people were the ones that were succumbing to the virus. But the data that really interested me recently came out of New York City. And the reason I think the UK and the US is so interesting to look at is that the UK and the US have more than their fair share of obesity and overweight. And this study that I looked at recently said, let's not only look at the risk factors, but let's do this statistical technique called multiple regression, and let's prioritize them. Because we might be observing that someone is dying because they're male and they've got cancer, or they're male and they've got heart disease, or they're male and they've got diabetes. And actually what we're really observing is the male thing, because it's just, it's going alongside the other things. And if we could get the male thing out of the way, we might actually realize, well no, diabetes wasn't an issue. So it really gets to the heart of what is an issue. And what was so fascinating was that the risk factor that was absolutely coming out was obesity. And it was having a BMI over 40. And if you had a BMI over 40, that was staying as one of the most significant risk factors once everything else was falling by the wayside. And the other thing, and this is just starting to be picked up in the UK, the other factor was ethnicity. So if people were coming from particularly an Asian background, the New York data was showing that was also a significant risk factor. Now, I don't know if you, like me, have seen these tragic photos of people in newspapers and on the media of care workers who've been on the front line, and they're getting a particular viral load as well. They're getting far more of the virus than you or I get if we just happen to touch a tube rail. And the combination of those three things seems to have been catastrophic. And quite often, the most caring people in our society are the people who are most likely to have a BMI over 40, because the last person that they look after is themselves. They look after everyone else first. And I look at these wonderful people who have lost their lives in this virus, and I'm thinking, why did we not protect you? Why were you not at home, having been given that letter of actually you are surprisingly one of these high-risk people? Please don't go and care for others, because you're actually likely to lose your life before they do. But we didn't seem to know that when we said to these people, carry on caring. It doesn't really matter what size you are. It doesn't really matter what your background is. If you're young, you'll be okay. And we now know that that's not the case.
Yeah. So for anyone listening who, you know, can hear that you're talking absolute common sense, but they know that they are overweight and they probably are in a pattern of eating, you know, stuff that they shouldn't be. Where do they start? You feel free to plug your books mercilessly.
Well, I mean, I just eat real food. Yes, if you've got addictions, you've got food cravings. I wrote my first book in 2004. It seems incredible now. And it was called Why Do You Overeat When All You Want Is to Be Slim? And it's still probably my favorite because it was my story. And it was why I couldn't understand why I was overeating when I wanted more than anything in the world to be slim. And I have been slim now for 25 years, having worked out what to do. My weight doesn't change at all. I feel guilty at how much I can eat, not feeling deprived, not feeling hungry. I'm in a different world now to the one I was, where I was trying to count calories and avoid fat and avoid the most nutritious foods. It's just completely reframing your relationship with food. But I mean,
in the early stages, I mean, if somebody, I mean, you're right to eat real food, but you do recommend that if you do have weight to lose, which we've already identified from this conversation, it can be dangerous if you're really overweight, as we've already said, and you are going to become, you know, if you get sick, it's going to be harder for you. So initially, we are going to need a period of time where we have some kind of, in inverted commas, diet. And like you, I hate that word because it means something else, doesn't it? It's a really annoying word. So, you know, would you recommend your, you know, the Harcombe diet, that book, and doing that kind of 5-day process?
Yeah, I would, because the 5 days gets rid of cravings. It really does get rid of cravings. And the weight loss in some people has been absolutely spectacular. And the 5 days basically just takes you back to any unprocessed meat, any unprocessed fish, eggs, natural live yogurt, because you want some help with the gut flora as well, vegetables, salads, brown rice, or quinoa or porridge oats. That's the only thing that's limited. So it's actually easier to do than some of these very low carbohydrate diets that are
And
around
you
at the
have a
moment.
vegetarian version as well, don't
Yes,
you?
no, absolutely. When I wrote the book, I personally was vegetarian. So, if anything, it's more friendly to vegetarians than perhaps the average real food book would be. And it really can, even just in a short 5 days, and it explains why it's 5 days, it really can get you down the pathway of why have I craved things, and how do I stop craving things, and what are the other conditions going on. So it can really help. And there's no time like now. I saw something in one of the papers today where somebody decided, when lockdown was announced, that she was going to do something. I think she's 1.5 stone down, as we now enter week 6 of lockdown. I mean, how incredible is that?
Yeah.
You really can make a big difference quite quickly. But if I or a loved one at the moment had a BMI over 40, particularly if I had any other risk factors that I thought might be a complication on top, I would actually be self-isolating right now. I would actually be saying, the evidence has now emerged that I'm one of the people most at risk, and I need to make that decision for myself, protect myself.
Yeah, great. Just remind us then where we can find your various books then, Zoe. Just give us your website, and I'm sure that lots of people would like to find out more about the various things you offer.
Yeah, so it's zoeharcombe.com, HARCOMBE, and pretty much everything is on there, blogs, little links off other places. And yes, there is a subscription model on it, but there's also quite a few free articles as well. So if you want to rummage around those, you're very, very welcome. And that's it. That's me.
Fantastic. I really appreciate it. It makes so much sense. Thank you so much for all the amazing work you do.
Oh, thank you. And you too, Janey. You've been doing this as long, if not longer, I'm sure, than I have in this whole natural health world, not just food. So thank you as well.
Thanks very much, Zoe. Appreciate it.